Test 1, 2. Can I hear your audio real quick, Anthony?
Oh, me?
Yeah, good. Okay, it's working. Sweet.
Test 1, 2.
Hey, someone's already in the chat room. Can you hear us yet? Can you hear us in the live stream? Yes, sweet. And it's not even that delayed today. You know what? This is amazing. The internet is working great tonight.
Yeah, I don't have it yet.
Do you think this cold weather makes the internet faster?
No, I don't have it yet.
You don't see it yet? All right. Well, someone's in the chat room, so I think that's a good sign. Someone says that they love the goggles, Anthony.
Oh, thanks.
So someone's seeing us. That's the good news. I know you can't see us yet. Anthony is wearing goggles. It's a bit. We got a bit tonight.
It's I'm just keeping warm.
Is that the Twitch ad?
It's the ad.
Yeah. What's the ad tonight? What'd you get?
What's the ad tonight?
Yeah. What are we sponsored by? Is that how this works?
It's loud.
It's loud. Okay. All right. Well, it's brought to you by Polar Vortex, at least.
Oh, Izod.
I'm computer generous.
Is that you?
It was me. It wasn't me just now.
What's the first thing you said? So I know I'm on the right one.
Hello, maybe?
Takes a minute before it actually gets started.
I hear that. I hear me.
Chat room while I'm waiting.
Is that you?
That's me.
I don't. Let's see.
People are chatting with us, so I know we're live.
Oh, look at that.
We have a unique situation, everyone in the chat room, where you can hear and see us, but Anthony has no idea that we're live yet.
I think the video is a little saying hi to someone in the chat room, but I don't see my video on my device.
Do I get the right one?
Yeah, that was my audio check there.
Okay, so do you see 3 posts currently?
3 posts? No, I see a dozen people. I see 3 viewers. Sorry, 3 viewers, but the chat room is pretty busy.
All right, I'm in the wrong one. Just know I'm in the right one.
Okay, all right, good. So my video, the viewport tag, I had a
this is the right
and I think it probably varies by Android version.
Oh yeah, I didn't talk about Android tonight. Man, the chat room's funny tonight.
Yeah.
You're missing out.
I'm there. I'm there now.
Video.
Sweet.
Okay, so you tell me, do you see the Adele joke?
Oh yeah, this
Okay.
Okay, good.
All right.
It took a while.
It took a while. Yeah, and this is gonna be a fun live stream. It's a little cold in my house. How's it over there?
I gotta say hi to my peeps.
We can turn our thermostats back up at midnight.
Oh, our thermostat is still set low. I hope everyone else is too. Did you get the consumer's notice on your phone yesterday, Anthony?
No, I did not,
You
and
did
I
not?
was very upset that I did not get it. I double checked my settings.
So I had my headphones in. It was, I don't know, it was like around 10 at night or something like that. I had my headphones in. I was doing dishes. And all of a sudden, this big, like, squealing noise starts in both of my ears. And I jumped like a foot in the air. I had just finished washing a knife. And this terrifying noise alerts me to the fact that I need to keep my house cold, which I think is good for all of us. But it was
Well-
terrifying, and I almost could have cut off my finger.
I had to increase the temperature 2 degrees to meet the standards.
Are you drinking ice water right there? Is that what you're doing?
No, this is Crystal Light.
There you go.
It's my new favorite. It's watermelon.
So I think we should address the elephant in the room, Anthony. Do you think I have two questions. One, is the college going to be open tomorrow? And two, has the college ever been closed 4 consecutive days in a row due to weather?
No one can predict the future with 100% accuracy, except for me. We will be open tomorrow.
It's been a long time. You know, I miss being in the building. I'm getting a little stir crazy. It's so cold.
Yeah. I'm just glad we get to at least go back one day this week.
Yeah.
At least one.
And Friday's the best day, right? So.
Eric, we kept talking about how it was a perpetual Saturday, that the next day would be Sunday. So we've had like 4 or 5 Sundays this week.
Yeah.
But we have to go back.
We do have to go back. And, you know, my son's school is closed. Other schools are already closed. But we'll be, as far as we know, Mid will be open tomorrow. So if you'd like to come to campus, use the labs, I hope they'll be warm. Are you ready to talk about CSS, Anthony?
That's pretty good. Yes, I'm ready. Are we all here?
Everyone is accounted for in the chat room. We have 10 people. Look at that.
Yeah, local schools are closing. The K-12s are closing.
Yeah. Well,
We are not.
buses will do that to you. Okay, so tonight is a really important night. We're moving on from HTML, what we had called the first of the 3 technologies that we're going to focus on, and we're going to talk about cascading style sheets, CSS. We already posted a video from last semester. It was a recording of the lecture that I gave in week 4. I thought it was pretty good. Did you have a chance to watch that?
Good. It was really good.
I don't think we're going to be able to recreate everything from that video. So if you've already watched it, I hope it was valuable to you. If you haven't watched it, I think you should watch it. I don't think we're going to cover all of the same topics in tonight's video. It's just too cold. And I think we have an advantage. We have 2 people here. We're going to talk about CSS a little bit differently. I think that will be valuable to everyone who's trying it out for the first time. But this is our plug for the video that's already posted at the bottom of week 4. In fact, I've got my screen up here. So where it says live stream week 4 archive, you can access the slides that we're going to be going over tonight. We're actually just going to focus on chapter 11, but there are slides about chapter 12 available too. And where it says from fall 2018, that is my introduction to CSS from fall 2018.
Which is really good. It's worth a watch.
It is, and I'm trying to get more subscribers on YouTube, so, you know, watch it, hit the button, smash subscribe, whatever they say. I'm going to pull up the slides now, Anthony, if you want to get them up on your screen.
Yep.
When we talk about CSS, the biggest question is probably like why, right?
Why? Why CSS? Why would we even do that?
What if I told you it was actually less work if we had something like CSS?
I can't imagine, because we already have to do all this HTML stuff. Now you want to do an additional thing with the CSS. It seems like more work to me. How could it be less work?
Okay, I'm gonna try to pitch it to you. HTML is all about tags, right? You're structuring your content, you're putting it on a page, you're telling the browser what the most important pieces of information are with headings. You're making lists be lists. You're making links be these anchor tags. You've got a nav region. You've used all the glorious HTML tags. After you put it on the page, what if you want to change the font of everything to be your favorite font? You wouldn't want to have to go back through and sprinkle in additional font tags around everything that needed to be the separate font.
So you're saying if I all of a sudden change my mind and now I want Papyrus for everything.
Oh, ow. Yes, Papyrus.
Yeah, I just go in and I change all the code from whatever lame font you were using to Papyrus, right?
Yeah, you would switch from Comic Sans to Papyrus, and in one little line in CSS, that can affect the whole appearance of your website. And when I say website, I actually mean all of the web pages, not just a single one. And this is really the sales pitch for CSS, the style sheet part. Instead of having to litter your code with extra tags, and these tags did exist. In fact, I bet some of you have written them yourself already. You may have found the font tag, you may have found the bold tag, the italic tag. All of these tags that had to do with appearance are actually now deprecated. Some people say depreciated is deprecated technically. That means that they have been abandoned. They are no longer supposed to be used. Instead, you can use this glorious new technology called CSS, where you write code a little bit differently. It doesn't look like tags. You're able to write less code and affect more things at once. But you're kind of like separating out in your brain here from the HTML and the content to what the page is going to look like. And when you have that separation, you can save yourself a lot of time. So the main seller of CSS for something like the Midmish website is we have one style sheet, and that's where all of our appearance information goes. And it affects the design of every single web page, not just the front page, but also the current students page, the apply page, the contact us page. So when we make decisions about changing the design of the website, we go into one place on our one file, make some changes, and that will update thousands of web pages. If you had taken web design in the past, that wasn't the case.
Are you really saying that the Midmish website just has one file, one CSS file that controls the whole site?
Well, we're going to show you a tool next week so you can either prove me wrong or right. I'm pretty sure there's only one major style sheet that we've written.
For the whole site?
For the whole site. It's a really long one. It's got a couple thousand things in it, but it's there.
But just one?
Just one. Now,
right.
it can get really complicated to maintain that when there's 1,000 things in the file. So later in chapter 11, the author introduces comments. I think a couple people use comments in HTML before, but they also exist in CSS, and they allow you to write notes to yourself, and we use that to keep that really tall 1,000-line CSS file a little bit easier to understand and organize. So did I sell you on less work?
No, it sounds like that big file's pretty huge. Why would it be possible that we could do our current website without using a CSS file? Could we just put all this in the HTML files throughout the site and do the same thing?
I suppose you could. It would be a lot of work if we then decided to change to Papyrus. If we changed our style guide, we'd then have to edit thousands of web pages instead of just one file.
So we're not necessarily saving upfront work as much as if we want to make a change, we can just change it in that one document, and then the whole website changes. That's when we're going to see the benefit from all this.
That's the biggest benefit, and that's my biggest sales pitch. But I will tell you that every time we make a new news press release, no one's having to write any CSS for that. It just inherits that same style sheet. And if we were using all the tags for adding fonts into them, the person who writes the news press releases would have to add those tags themselves, and we avoid that by using that site style sheet.
Tell me more.
All right, I'll tell you about accessibility. I've tried to make the case, and so has our author, that you should really think about the structure of your document, use headings, use lists, use the right tag for the content that you're trying to display. And that's because assistive technology like screen readers will be able to understand the parts of your page. And that's really the pitch that we're trying to make with CSS as well, is if you keep the appearance information and the styles of the website separate, then visitors who don't show the visual aspect of the web page can still understand the document. If you focus more on what your website looks like without caring for how the content's organized, you're not serving all the visitors of your website. So by using CSS, the style sheet part, you're actually making good choices when you write the HTML, and you don't have to do as much work with the CSS. There's also another benefit, and that's flexibility. I want to show you, I'm going to jump ahead here to the next slide. There is a site called the CSS Zen Garden. Let me put this up full screen. Oops, that's the wrong one. There we go, computer screen. This is slide 4, Anthony. If you write your styles separately from the HTML, then you gain additional flexibility. You could actually write a whole different style sheet and make your site look entirely different. And to prove the power of CSS, someone did that. I think it was over a decade ago. The CSS Zen Garden was created to showcase how different artists or different designers could make the same HTML file look incredibly different. So on the screen now we have, in the middle we have this dinosaur design. On the right, it looks like we have someone playing the flute on top of a single column of text, whereas the very first column on the far left showed like 2 or 3 different columns of text. I promise you this is the exact same HTML file. The only difference is that a different style sheet changes the colors, changes the fonts, changes the layout. All of the underlying content is the same. And if you look closely enough in the book, at the picture, you'll see that the wording is all the same. Sometimes they're ordered differently, but all the content is the same. And I love the Zen Garden. Have you ever checked it out, Anthony?
Yes. It's been around for a while, and it's a very popular site for web classes on web design.
I hope it lives on forever. I've found out that they've closed it for new submissions, but I'm trying to keep the dream alive. The midterm project for our web design class at Mid is actually your own CSS Zen Garden submission. So in a couple weeks, I know we're already in week 4, before you know it, we're going to be in midterm season, and you will actually be downloading the same Zen Garden HTML file that created all 3 of these designs that are on the screen. And you'll be applying CSS that you've been learning this week, and you'll continue learning for the next few weeks, to make your own Zen Garden design with your own color scheme, which we'll be talking about soon, with your own layout, with your own fonts, your own typography. You will write your own CSS style sheet and make a brand new unique design that no one's ever seen before. So that's kind of my favorite part of the semester, is giving you the same thing that I saw so many years ago and seeing what you can do with it with just a little bit of CSS.
So you're telling me everybody's using the same HTML and they're looking this different?
Yeah, there's only one tag that's really different between all of them, and it's the link tag, which is how you tell the browser which style sheet to use. So like the style sheet for the first one is probably like design number 20 or something like that. And so there's a tag in there that says to bring in the number 20 style sheet. The one in the middle, if that was 21, would have the number 21 style sheet. It's pretty impressive.
I just want to address potential technical issues with the feed. Is anyone else, we've got a few people commenting that their video is dropping. But the sound is still good. I'm just trying to see how prevalent this problem is. Is this happening to everyone, or are there some viewers who are not experiencing any video drop?
While we're waiting for that response, my computer is telling me that the encoding is overloaded. That doesn't sound like a good thing.
Well, I'm trying to spin it positively and I'm struggling.
It says to consider turning down the video. It's like, I don't know, maybe we have to turn down the Twitch stream to like 65 degrees too. I don't know.
Another video comment about lag, so I'm thinking that might be a universal thing. I'm getting it as well on my monitor of the live stream.
Okay. It seems pretty consistent that the audio at least sounds good.
Yeah. So we got enough to continue. Is this is anybody completely in the dark, or is it just that the frame rate is dropping? So maybe we're a little bit jumpy. Is that what it is, or are you not getting any video? Yeah, it's the weather. For sure it's the weather. Okay, so it's refreshing. I guess I'm thinking we could continue, and then if anybody does have any full video droppage, then just let us know, and we'll do something different than we're.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out if there's anything I can do. Unfortunately, everything I click on my computer is now slowing down too. All right, we'll do our best. This is why we're encouraging you to watch the other video as well, because that one came out pretty well, at least.
Yeah, that one won't freeze.
Okay, all right. So we talked about the Zen Garden. Don't forget the Zen Garden. In fact, I would encourage you to start exploring it just to get some ideas for what you can do with CSS, because I promise you all of that HTML code is the same. So I hope we've sold you on why CSS is important and how it's powerful. Let's actually talk about how you make CSS yourself. I'm going to jump ahead to, let's see, slide number 6, Anthony.
Yep.
Style rules. This is an example of 2 different CSS rules that have been written. The first one starts with H1, which I hope that looks familiar to you. And then there's a curly brace, like a opening curly brace, and then, oops, I'm trying to make the hand signal. There we go. I held up the right hand. There's like an opening curly brace, and then you see the word color, a colon, and then the closing, or a semicolon, and then the closing squiggly brace. Can you guess what that little line of code does, Anthony?
I'm sorry, our participants are funny. The line of code in the squiggly brackets, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, this thing that says H1 color green. What do you think that's going to do on a web page?
Well, we already know that an H1 is a header 1, and we've got the squiggly brackets in there with something different that we haven't seen before, and it's saying the color is going to be green. So I'm gonna guess that header 1 is going to be green.
Yeah, you figured it out. You can read CSS, man.
All right.
Now there's something pretty special about that. We wrote one thing that says H1, and if you had an H1 on your web page, you'd probably guess that it's going to turn it green. What's interesting about it though is this is a rule that actually blanket applies to all H1 tags. It selects all of them, and it says that all of their colors should be green.
My HTML document is going to be green.
Every what? You broke up there.
Every one of my header 1s in my HTML document is going to be green?
Yes, every one. If you use a style sheet on multiple pages, then all the H1s on your whole website would be green.
Okay, now I'm starting to see how this could save me some time.
The next one's a little bit longer. It actually it has the word strong, and then color red, semicolon, font dash style, colon, italic. And that's kind of what it ends up being. What do you think this CSS will do?
Well, we already know that the color, we can assign the color to strong, which is an HTML tag that we've used.
Yeah, before. I think I saw that in the HTML database. I think someone picked that one out.
Yep. And then we're also saying that it's got a font style of italic. And this too will apply to everything that uses strong.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can, as you read CSS, you can kind of guess what it's going to do along the way. So you're already, without having written any CSS yet, maybe you have already this week because of your time on your computer in the snowstorm, but if you hadn't until today, just by reading through it, you can kind of get a guess for what these are going to do. What's important to talk about here as we dissect it is to label the parts of the CSS that have been written. The first thing that we talked about, those H1s and the strong, the thing that's outside of the curly brace, that's considered the selector. That's how you cast your net and decide what it is that you're trying to change the appearance of. There's a lot of different selectors that we're going to talk about each week this semester. most of the selectors that we're going to be working on this week happen to be the names of HTML tags. They're considered element selectors. That's what appears outside of the curly brace. Inside the curly braces are the actual style properties that you're trying to change. So these are considered declarations. It starts out with the name of a property, then you see the colon, and then the value that you're changing that property to, followed by a semicolon and an end curly brace. So in the example here that's written on one line, we have a selector, and then the declaration goes inside of curly braces. But if I get rid of our videos here, and I go just to the computer screen. Ooh, my computer is not happy here, guys. I think I've discovered the problem. It's coming from inside my computer. Can you still hear me, Anthony?
Yeah.
All right. This is never a good thing. I'm going to try to force quit something while we're live streaming. What could go wrong?
Just don't stop mining those Bitcoins.
That's probably what's going on in the background. I'm sure something's happening. Actually, I don't really have a good explanation for what's going on here.
Did you turn off your peer file sharing?
My computer says that nothing is using the CPU, so nothing's wrong. Everything is all right. And I'd continue on like this, but now that everyone's seeing a big CPU graph in front of the live stream, this is embarrassing, everybody.
We have a suggestion. Have you tried restarting your machine?
That might happen here, whether I want to or not. Okay, I got rid of the thing that was taking up the screen so we can continue on. Could someone say something in the chat room so I know that we're still alive?
I can see you, so I guess I will. I see you.
Okay, someone said I see you. Oh, wait, no, that was you, though. Can anyone else?
But I'm just like everybody else. I'm watching it from the live stream.
Oh, you're seeing it from the live stream. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. Well, I'm sorry about this, everybody. We were talking about how to structure your style rules. You can write them just like this, but you probably want to change more than one thing at a time. Like our previous example, we changed the font color, we changed the style. You might want to change background color or borders or things like that, in which case you don't have to write the same selector over and over and over. You can write one selector, and then inside of those curly braces, you can write as many declarations as you want. So you could say font-family. I think that was one of the properties that was mentioned in the database this week. You could say the color, you could say font style. You could list as many of those as you want. You just have to separate each one of those by semicolons. So what do you think of that?
Are there? I can use as many as I want. Are there any other rules? I can use like 15 different properties, 20 different properties.
Yeah, there's no limit. They do have to be separated by the semicolon, but you could even write all those on one line. So the way that's shown on the left here, on the left here with one line, you could actually write 100 CSS properties all on one line separated with semicolons, and it wouldn't matter. And that probably sounds familiar because that's what you said about HTML, right, Anthony?
Yeah.
So why would you want to separate these onto multiple lines? What's the benefit?
Well, very, very similarly to the HTML we were talking about, you as an author of this code may not be the only person who needs to look at it. Future generations may be studying what you're doing here, and if you make it neat and easy to read for a human being, it seems like their lives will be better.
Future
And
generations. Do it for your kids. Do it for your children. That's perfect.
yeah,
No, it's for humans though, right? Because the browser has what it needs just by seeing those curly braces and seeing the semicolons. Those are the rules that matter. The line spacing, the indentation, that serves only the purpose of us humans. But keep in mind that you're the human.
Generations will be human.
We think. I mean, for the most part.
It's a good chance.
So that's how you write CSS rules. I want to talk a little bit more about selectors today. I mentioned how most of the ones that you're going to be using in this chapter are element selectors. Those match up to the name of the tags that you've been working with. Oops, I just lost something. Can you still hear me, Anthony?
Yep.
I lost my second display, which might have been the cause of all our woes. There we go. Okay.
I don't want to lose all the woes. It's the only way to get a horse to stop.
Oh, this is why people tune in live. Now even my video has paused. All right. Well, Anthony, your video is working again. Mine is not. So people are going to be staring at my frozen face. Oh, it's moving again.
We're both frozen, and I got the stupidest look on my face. Oh, nope, that one's stupider. All right, we're good. We're good.
Okay. All right. Selectors. I'm sorry for all the technical difficulties, everyone. Okay. So selectors this week are mostly going to be the element names that you've already come to learn and love, like P for paragraph, A for anchor tag, nav, H1, H2. But very quickly in the upcoming chapters, you're going to be introduced to a different selector every chapter. So very soon we're going to be talking about ID selectors, which are great for selecting, just one thing on a page. Class selectors, which can select multiple things that all share the same class. The reason you have these different types of selectors is the number of times where you are just casting a wide net and saying, I want to change all of the anchor tags to blue or green or purple is actually very rare. If you think about a modern web page, you're going to have a part of the web page that's like the nav bar, and that's typically one color. Whereas later on, you might have like the content of your blog post, and you probably don't want the links in there to be the same color as a nav bar because there's probably a different background color at play. So when you are trying to write the CSS to make this design work and have papyrus in one area and have Times New Roman in another, you need to write selectors that are a bit more targeted, that cast a smaller net, that only affect items in a certain region of the page. And that's where the ID selectors, class selectors, and even descendant selectors are going to come into play.
And this is that same concept that we talked about previously, where there could only be one ID selector of the same name in the document.
Yeah, the same one. So on any HTML tag, when you're writing an attribute, if you give it an ID attribute, you're on the hook to make sure that there's only one element on the page that has that ID. Okay, here on this slide we have another example. We should have gone to this slide before. This is slide 9, Anthony, where it breaks it down again that you have a selector. Inside of that declaration block, you can have properties and their values. In this week's Moodle activity, you will be finding your own properties to share with the class. Anthony and I both shared our own favorites, but we're trying to help you just understand what properties are available, because there really are hundreds, if not thousands of them. And there are certain ones that you're going to use more than others. For instance, with H2 here, we can see that we're changing the color, the size of it, we're adding some margin, and we're changing its opacity. All of these, I think I've seen students share in the past in that activity. So make sure when you contribute to that, you're not duplicating what someone else has already shared with the class. We've talked about that. Oh, hey, here's a slide all about CSS comments. We talked about the white space that you leave around your CSS helps future generations. I think just as valuable for your grandkids who are managing your website might be CSS comments. When we talked about the mid website and how we have a CSS file with thousands of lines in it, it would be really hard for us to separate out which styles do which. So we actually will add this slash and the asterisk or the star character at the beginning of a comment, and then you can type anything you want over multiple lines, and it will all be ignored. It won't try to change the design of your site until you get to the star slash again, and that ends the comment. But these are great for organizing. So if you have styles that are going to specifically change your nav bar or change all your headings or might have to do with colors, you can group them within comments.
So, Brandon, what's a good way to determine when to comment and when not to comment? I mean, how much detail do we give these people that we may never meet that are going to read this code at some unknown future date? What will they expect from us?
Well, they don't need to know that you're setting something to red, because a lot of the code that you're going to write is going to tell you exactly what it's doing. What you might want to do is thematically break up your style sheet into sections, and then you might want to add a comment as to why you've organized that code together, maybe when that code was added, or explaining the thought process. Like at the college, we have a college-wide style guide that we have to adhere to. So if we decide to change our logo or decide to change something about our font sizes, we might leave a comment to ourselves about why a decision was made. And so we'll leave that as a comment.
I find it interesting that you said comment to ourselves. Is that another aspect that maybe the audience isn't the future person, but maybe it's our future selves?
Oh, yeah.
When did that come into play?
I write most of my comments as if they are to my future self, explaining why something was done the way it was done, or leaving a hint for the future. They're little breadcrumb trails. Does that answer? Is that you're trying to get inside my psyche as to why I write comments? It's mostly just so I can remember what was going on at the time.
But at the time, you think you're going to remember, but
you never do. You're never going to have everything in your mind the same way again.
Okay.
The last bullet point on here is probably a good thing to point out. Why else might you want to comment something out? Well, if you're troubleshooting and you're not sure if the style you wrote is actually controlling the element that you think it is, you can always just delete it, right? Or if you don't want to delete it, you could comment it out. You could surround it with this slash star and star slash. And in Atom, it actually will make that be a different color. So it'll look visually different. So you'll see that it's not actually active CSS, and you'll know that it's been commented out. And the browser ignores it.
So you're saying that I've written a line of code and I'm thinking, well, maybe I don't need that. I can, instead of deleting it, I can comment it out. Essentially, that code will no longer be read as code. It'll just be read as a comment, so the browser will ignore it. And then if I so choose to bring it back later, I can just remove the comments, and then it turns back into code.
Yeah.
That's pretty sweet.
It is. And you have as many comments as you want. So you might use comments up at the top to explain the code that follows. And then inside, you could comment out the code that you don't want to take effect anymore. You can mix and match them. In fact, let's show you that in Atom. I think we're getting close to pulling up some code here in a minute. So the next slide, slide 12, asks or shows you how to add styles to a web page, and it shows you 3 different ways. And this leads us to the CSS 3 ways challenge, as we like to call it. There are reasons to use each one of these techniques. Some have very clear advantages and very clear disadvantages. And what I'll tell you is I personally have used all 3 of these ways of adding CSS within the last 3 weeks. So there are times where you might reach for one of these than another. And as we go through the CSS 3 Ways Challenge, I think I can try to point out a few of those, and maybe you can ask me some more questions about why it is that we use one technique over another. At this point in time, Anthony, I'm opening up the file for the 3 Ways Challenge.
Okay.
It's pulled up in Atom. You can kind of see the color coding from Atom with the HTML tags, and you can see that there are HTML comments left for hints for our students because we love them, showing you where you might need to add CSS a certain way. There's not a lot of HTML in here. It's mostly a heading, a paragraph, a list, another paragraph, and then a closing statement that says good luck. The point of the challenge, besides practicing CSS, is to actually make a web page look like something that we've posted for you. There's a screenshot. Where'd it go? There's a screenshot. Let me move this out of the way. There's a screenshot posted with the code that says, "Welcome to CSS 3 Ways Challenge." And that heading is now in red. And the list is numbered. There's some borders on the page and some background colors on the page. The point of this exercise is to recreate this following the hints that we've left for you. So what are the 3 ways? Let's bring up that slide again. You can include CSS with an external style sheet, which this is the technique that I was proclaiming will save you time in the future by writing one CSS file and using it on multiple pages. The way you implement that's essentially the essence of an external style sheet. You write one CSS file, and then in each of your HTML documents, you say, go look at the style sheet and use those styles. The second way of including CSS is through embedded style sheets. There is an HTML tag called style that you can put in the metadata part of the web page, the head section. If you can write CSS anywhere you want in between those two tags, the two style tags that you open and close. And then the third and last way to add CSS is more cumbersome, but also very powerful still. It's through inline styles. You can actually take advantage of the style attribute on HTML tags. So if you know that you want to make a paragraph a certain color, you don't have to write a style sheet for that. You could actually go to the P tag, add a style attribute, and write some CSS inside of it. So there's the 3 ways laid out. These correspond to 3 hints that we have left inside of this document. Let's start with hint number 2. Hint number 2 says that an embedded style sheet, aka the style element, could go here. So right after that in the code, you could actually just start typing style, and hopefully Atom, yeah, here we go, is auto-completing what I'm typing. So if you hit enter or tab, it will move your cursor in between 2 style tags that have magically appeared because we love Atom. And this is where your CSS can go. Now what's cool about Atom is it will apply this awesome color coding even to the CSS that you write. But it does expect that your CSS not have any errors in it. So if you had a typo in any of your CSS, the color coding is going to break. And that is a great way to troubleshoot code that you're writing. It is also my plea to all students to actually not write all their CSS on one line. Actually write it across several lines, because then you can see whenever the color coding breaks, that means that Atom has detected some sort of error along the way. So let's figure out what's the first thing that we want to do. If we're writing this style, I think in that screenshot, the first thing that I noticed was the Welcome to CSS 3 Ways Challenge was red. That's very clearly affecting the H1 here. Now I know there's a hint number 3 about using an inline style, but let's actually just write some CSS inside of this embedded style sheet here to affect that H1. So we just type the H1 and then the curly braces. So that's our selector. And now we write inside of the curly braces our declaration, which starts out with the property that we want to change, which in this case is color. And how do you know it's color? Well, practice. 1, the CSS database activity that we have in Moodle right now is a great place to find a bunch of CSS properties that your peers have contributed. But Atom itself has this autocomplete, and it even has a description of what this color property is going to do. So it says that will set the foreground color value of an element's text content and text decorations. That sounds like what I want. So I'm going to hit enter. It adds the colon for me. And let's make it red and add the semicolon. The semicolon gets important because if we have multiple declarations in here, that's what's going to separate it out. So I'm going to save and go back and open up this file. And just like that, we now have a red heading. Now there's a lot that we have to do to get this to where we want to go. So let's go back to the screenshot. You might notice that this heading is also centered. So one of the next properties that we could add in here is text align. And then center. And then we could save that. Go back to Chrome and refresh. And we're slowly but surely getting closer toward recreating that. So that was one way of writing CSS inside of this embedded style. Let's take that and put it in an external style sheet real quick. I'm going to cut this. And let's go up to File, New File, and paste this in. And I'm going to save it. It's going to ask me what do you want to save this as. I'm going to call it brandonstyles.css. Notice how when I save something as a CSS file, Atom starts to color code it, or at least it should be here in a second when my computer catches up.
So just like it was important to tell Atom that you were working on an HTML file instead of the default text file, you're telling Atom that it's a CSS file so that it can adjust the color coding and the autocomplete accordingly.
Yes. Yeah. And you can actually set the mode of the file like we did to HTML to CSS. But when you save as a .css file, Atom's supposed to pick that up automatically. It doesn't look like my computer's cooperating though. Atom's spinning out of control. It did save my file at least. So if it crashes, it won't be a complete loss. I'm quitting it. Let's try opening it again. Computers don't like the cold, man.
Yet they freeze up all the time.
That's a good one. Come on, computer, you can do it.
I'm going to see how much the delay is here.
There we go. Okay, it's back. Okay, so as it saved, it did add some color coding here. So the H1, the selector is shown in red. Certain of the keywords like red here are color coded when these are proper values. The same auto complete powers exist in this file. So if I wanted to add a margin, I could start typing margin and the possibilities will show up with a description that you can arrow up and down in and hit enter to autocomplete. If you select one of the curly braces, it will get that cool underline and it will underline the pair for it. And it also lets you do the code folding. So if you have a really long file, you could actually collapse some of the code that you don't want to look at to hide it out of the way. So all the niceties of Atom work in CSS just as well as they work in HTML. So this is the brandonstyles.css file that we created. I removed that code from the file. So if I go back and I refresh the page, we no longer have our red heading. So there's something that I have to add in here, and hint number 1 tells you a good place to put it. You have to actually tell the browsers that you are using a CSS style sheet, and you do that with the link tag. Now, ironically, it's the link tag and not the anchor tag. I have never figured out fully why we use anchor tags for links and then we use link tags for adding CSS, but that's just how the world works. So this is the link tag. If you hit enter, everything that you need kind of gets auto-completed here. There's this relationship attribute, which means what type of content are you linking, and that's a style sheet. What matters most for you to change is what goes in the href value, which should look really familiar. This is where we're going to put the file name of our CSS file. Now it has a folder here, which I don't have a folder. I don't have a CSS folder in mine, so I'm getting rid of that. And now we just need the name of the style sheet, which I think was brandonstyles.css. So if I save this and I go back to Chrome now, with any luck, we'll have our styles back. And there we go. We've got this red heading centered here. And now we've done 2 of the ways of including CSS. I am going to remove this code again, just to show you that everything's back to the way it was. And if I go to hint number 3 on this H1, this is where I hinted that you might want to use an inline style attribute. The inline style attribute is just the word style. So you have to add a space to the opening H1 tag, and then you can type style. And autocomplete works here as well. It'll tell you that this is something that can contain CSS styling declarations. You hit enter, and it automatically adds the equal sign and the quotation marks here. So then you can type CSS declarations in here. You don't have to write the selector. The selector is already implied. The selector is this element, this H1 element that we're working on here. It is not going to affect any other region of the page. It only affects this H1 and anything inside of it. So this is where I could write color :red semicolon. That's one declaration. And the second one is the text align center, or sorry, text align : center. Semicolon. And if I go back, now we've got that heading centered again. Now that when you write inline styles, you don't have to write the selector if that's important, but you do have to add these semicolons between each declaration. If I got rid of those, the styling would break. Now there are very clear downsides to this. It would be really hard to apply a dozen different CSS properties on this H1 because it would add a lot of code in here besides the content. It'd be hard to manage. It would also be really painful if you then added, let's say this wasn't an H1, let's say it was like a P tag. I had added all these styles to style one paragraph, and then I realized, oh, but the second paragraph needs to do that too. You wouldn't want to rewrite all that CSS again. That's where you would start using your embedded style sheet or your external style sheet to write a rule that affects multiple things at once. Trying to check my notes here to make sure that we're moving along. Okay, so there is an aspect of this screenshot that might be harder to recreate than the others. There is this pro tip: you are encouraged to use Google as a resource box, and it has this dashed line around it. Someone in the chat room had already mentioned the word border. That's a border. That one is a little bit harder to do. You might be able to figure out how to do it with inline styles, but I wanted to show you how there is this class attribute. I wanted to show you how you could take advantage of that. So do you have a preference, Anthony, between an external style sheet and an embedded style sheet?
It depends on the situation, but we've already got that external one.
Yeah, let's use the external. I like that. So let's try to write some CSS that affects this paragraph here. So let's go over to Brandon Styles, and I'm just going to try to affect all the paragraphs, and I'm going to give them a border. I'm going to give them a border that's 1 pixel, solid, and black here. That's an example that you'll see all over the web. Now, unfortunately, when I refresh the page, you'll see that there were 2 paragraphs on that page. So it applied the border to all of them, and that's not quite what I want. So I mentioned that there's this class on this paragraph. There's a way that I could write some CSS that only affects things that have a class of resource. So I'm going to get rid of this P here, and instead I'm going to add a dot, a period, and the word resource. This is called a class selector. Class selectors start with the period and then the name of the class that you're affecting. So if I save this and I go back, that's moving in the right direction. We no longer have the border around the first paragraph. It's only over the pro tip one. So we've changed what we're selecting. We are now only looking for one type of thing, anything with a class of resource. Now, I think I got a few things wrong. It was supposed to be a dashed border instead of a solid one. So I'm going to replace the word solid with dashed. Hit refresh. Okay, that's looking better. But if I open up the screenshot next to it, there's not enough space between pro tip and the border around it. So one of the next topics that we're going to be talking about in the next weeks is the box model. Those are the properties that surround all the boxes on a web page, and every tag is essentially a block. You can have a border around it, you can have margin around it, and you can have padding. Padding is what is between the element and its border. So for this activity, it looks like we need padding, and I'm just going to put 10 pixels all around it. So that's actually looking pretty close to the screenshot. If I zoom back out here, it's got the same type of border, and I've written that in an external style sheet. Some of these are going to be easier than others. There's going to be other properties that you have to use. We've been working mostly with color, but you're going to need to use background color for some of these. We worked on text alignment. We worked on padding. I think you've got a lot of the things that you're going to need to make this work, and we've now covered 3 different selectors, or there's 3 different ways that you can add styles to a web page to get this functional. So I hope you'll have fun with that. Do you have any concerns or questions that you want to bring up about it?
You just used the class. Could you have also have set up an ID and targeted that paragraph that way?
There's another example in that file, I think. Is there anything that has an ID? Oh, no, this example only has classes. But yeah, in the HTML, that could have been an ID. And then instead of using the period, you would use a different symbol. And we're going to get into this more in future weeks, so it's not as important to know all the selectors today. But instead of a dot, there's the pound sign, and that corresponds to the ID attribute.
More just that you've got a lot of different choices on your approach that could result in the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, do you feel like playing a game, Anthony?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, all right. So this is something that I used to do in class. I had teams assembled in the class. I think it was like red versus blue, or maybe it was red versus green. But I was actually pretty excited when I saw that our author plays the same type of game. We've talked all about selectors and ways of adding CSS, but we kind of skipped over the word cascade in the cascading style sheets definition. The C is actually pretty important, pretty powerful. And where this comes into play the most is what happens when there are multiple styles that are vying for attention, that are trying to change the color of something, let's say. And on slide 22, Anthony, is where there's these 3 paragraph rules that all try to change the color of paragraphs to a certain color. One of them tries to set the color to red. That's the first one. The second one tries to set the color of the paragraphs to blue. And the third one tries to change the colors of the paragraph to green. What do you think a computer does when it sees all this? Is it going to give up, or is it going to pick a color?
Well, I would like to hear some guesses.
I would too. Hopefully our stream is still working here. In the chat room, what color do you think our paragraph would be? If I copied this code where red comes first, then blue, then green, what color are the paragraphs going to be? I'm actually going to go back into Atom here, and I'm going to add this in at the bottom here. So I've got 3 paragraph rules, and I've saved it. So as soon as we get some votes here, we need red votes, blue votes, and green votes. I'm not going to refresh my browser until we hear from a few people. I am, however, going to shrink some things on my computer screen so that we can get everything arranged. No votes yet. We only
There's
have 5 viewers left.
still the delay, so
Yeah.
But instead of a dot, there's the pound sign, and that corresponds to the ID attribute. Just you've got a lot of different choices on here.
well, that's a long delay.
Really drifted today, didn't it?
Yeah. There we go.
I don't think that's a color though.
It's not.
Oh man, I just got the video stream and yeah, that's not even to the right slide.
Yeah, there we go. It's coming.
I need to get a little soundboard that plays some interlude music while we wait for votes.
Yeah. What would you like to hear?
Is it still like are we allowed to play like the Jeopardy song or no? Is that pretty much against the rules?
As long as we're parroting Jeopardy, then we're fine.
Okay. Green. I have a vote for green. Did you have a vote, Anthony?
And there's a rationale.
Oh, even better. All right. So luckily, it seems to be a consensus in the group that it should be green. What's the rationale, Anthony?
Well, we've got a couple that are saying the same thing, that it's the last in the list, and that's why it wins.
Yeah. So I think intuitively we can kind of piece this apart too. Computers are going to be receiving a lot of conflicting information about the web page potentially. In fact, all browsers ship with default styles. When I opened up that CSS 3 Ways challenge, there was something that made the heading be bigger than the rest of the text, made it bolder, made the links already be blue. Every browser ships with CSS a default style sheet for the browser. And this is actually where some of that flexibility comes in for CSS. Because every browser ships with it, they always seem to have a feature that allows the user of the browser to set some preferences, like maybe I don't want my font size to be any smaller than 20 pixels. That's an accessibility feature, and it's also flexibility because all the other CSS rules are still going to come into play, including this user preference of a minimum font size. So all of these rules have to be considered by the browser, and one of them has to win out. And if two of them have the exact same selector, or in this case 3 of them, it's going to read this first rule, read the next rule, and it's just going to do exactly what has been asked of it. It's going to change the color to red, change the color to blue, change the color to green. It's actually doing all of that every single time, and that's why the last one wins. So there is a complicated series of math behind what the computer is doing to figure out what something is going to look like. If everything is equal, if 2 style rules are written exactly the same way, they have the same selector, the one that wins out is the last one that set the paragraph color in this instance. So we had 2 votes for green. They were right. Yay, everyone. Let's actually save this. Let's refresh this. Okay, good. Yeah, it's green. It's still green today. I kind of worried there that I had agreed too quickly. So this is true of if all of your CSS is written in one tall file like this, where up at the top you set something one color and then down below you set it another color. But it's also true because you could have multiple style sheets on a web page. you could include the mid style sheet and then write your own style sheet and then add another style sheet. You can have as many link tags on a page as you want. You can write CSS inside of a paragraph on the page. So not only could I have these rules, but then I could maybe come in here to one particular paragraph, like this one right here, and add a style attribute where I set the color to yellow. And if I refresh the page, in that instance, the one that wins out is yellow and not green. The reason that this wins out, that yellow wins out, is covered in our chapter pretty well. Has to do with priority. So any style that is done on an inline element wins out. It has a higher specificity. The weight that's given to each style rule comes in the priority of the style rule source, like where that style sheet's coming from, the specificity of the selector. So if it's just an element selector, it's less impactful as something that uses the ID selector. And then it comes down to rule order, like we've talked about. The priority, a bit more in depth from our author, says that certain styles that are marked by as important, but they're marked with the important tag, might win out over others. Something that's actually written by the website then comes into play. Then any of the user preferences on the browser have been added. And then finally, the user agent styles from the browser default that came with the browser, like Internet Explorer, Safari, or whatever, those finally come in very last. So the cascade represents a priority. It represents specificity. ID selectors, like I said, carry a large weight with them. So if you had an ID selector of resource, like we had talked about earlier, that color is going to win out over any other selector, a class selector or an element selector. The only thing that's going to override that would be an inline selector as well. So those were some important concepts to consider for CSS. We talked a little bit about the box model. We're going to be doing a whole week on that later on, but this is how you can add borders, margins, like space around the object, padding, space inside of the object before the border, and then backgrounds, of course. When you're setting size of borders or margins, you have to provide that size not just as a number, but with a unit. So there are a bunch of different units that you're going to play with over the next couple weeks. The one that's probably most common is pixel, because those are the dots on your screen. But then there are also these relative ones that I'm a big fan of. I love talking about the M unit. Do you know where the M unit comes from, Anthony? The EM unit?
No, but I will in a sec because I'm going to Google it.
You're going to Google it. Well, okay, you Google it and you tell me if I'm right. I come from a journalism background. I worked on a couple newspapers from high school through college, and a long time ago when papers were printed, they were done with these little blocks that represented characters. And one of the units of measurement that became very popular at that time was the M. It was actually a special character that represented the width of the M, the actual M, the swoopy letter M, like M for...
there it is.
Yeah, M for mile, although like the M was a space, a unit of measurement. So you could say, I want 5 M's between this headline and the next headline. And that would be 5 blank lines that were the size of an M, that were the height or the width of an M. And so that became really popular as a unit of measurement. It is actually a unit of measurement that you'll find used on the web today because it is relative. It's relative to the size of the font that you're using right now. If you say 10 pixels is just those 10 dots, no matter what the size of the font is around it. Whereas if you said 5 M's, it would take into consideration, what's the current font size? And it would add even more than just 5 pixels, for instance. So on these slides, the ones that I think you're going to use most are pixels, M's. There are some crazy new ones coming along that we'll talk about later in the semester that are actually fractions of the screen, of the computer screen, like viewport width. And then there's a new one called the REM, the root M, which isn't dependent on the current font size. It's dependent on the font size of the actual HTML element on the page, like the beginning default font size, which is usually 16 pixels on most browsers. So I think that is a whirlwind trip through those units of measurement. I feel like there was something that we didn't cover, Anthony. There it is, slide 17. this is a topic that I want to bring up because it ties back into HTML. One of the troubleshooting activities that we did, we made a huge deal about the order that you open and close HTML tags in. And that's because styles inherit from parents. So if I set the font color of a paragraph to red, that means anything inside of that is going to be red as well. And the reason that the order matters of those tags is when you open something that represents a parent, and when you close it, you're ending that relationship. So let me hide our faces here for a minute. So it's just my computer screen.
Do you know what I inherited?
What would you inherit?
Male pattern baldness.
Oh, I don't think you're the only one, Anthony.
Okay.
You did not inherit font color or font family, but you did inherit some things. All of the HTML tags in your document do inherit something. So as you're setting the CSS, remember that you're affecting not just what you're selecting, but the children of that thing as well. Now, certain CSS properties inherit and certain ones don't. It's kind of hard to figure out what those are, except you can kind of intuitively guess it. There are some things that you wouldn't want to inherit. If you set the border of something, you wouldn't want the children inside of it to also have a border, and those children to have a border over and over and over. So in my mind, I think of anything that applies to like the font, like the size of the font or what type of font is being used, or anything that has to do with colors. Those are the things that usually inherit. Because if you were to set the background color of something, you wouldn't want the immediate child inside of it to not get that color. You'd want it to come with it. So those are the types of properties that inherit. But the order of the tags that you open and close still comes into play here. It's really important that you make sure you understand how the body contains the H1, and inside of the body you might have paragraphs, which in turn might have like these M tags inside of them. That's going to be haunting us throughout the whole course. Do you have any more inheritance jokes?
No, but that sounds very ominous that we're going to have this ghost through the course.
Well, I mentioned it 2 weeks already. I'm sure we'll mention at least one more about the order. Chapter 11 closes with an introduction to the developer tools that are built into the browsers that we use. We are not going to talk about that this week. We are going to wait until next week to talk about the developer tools and the web inspectors. They're awesome, and I can't wait to talk about that. Take a look in Moodle pretty soon, and you'll see that week open up. Someone in the chat room mentioned that they always use percents. Percents are really nice for specifying width and height and layout aspects, but they can kind of be a little bit worrisome if you're trying to set the border on something. I don't think you would set a border necessarily to be a percentage